I know full well that Tifa is a top-tier waifu in the hearts of a whole lot of weebs. There are 6 different versions of Tifa out there, and after thinking it through carefully, I decided to go with Tifa from Final Fantasy VII Remake, the one that most perfectly embodies the ultimate waifu vibe. She might not be the strongest version, but even with nothing but her fists, she's still clearly leagues above the general power level in the boys. So now, let's see how she handles Homelander in today's video.
The city didn't announce itself. It just pressed in noise and concrete and the particular smell of a place that hadn't been cleaned in years, but had learned to call the grime character. Somewhere a television was on. It was always on. Tifa could hear it through the wall of the room she hadn't paid for in a building she hadn't planned to sleep in on a street she didn't know the name of. She sat on the edge of a stripped mattress and listened. The anchor's voice was smooth, reassuring. The kind of voice that was trained to tell you a building had just fallen and make it sound like rain. Continued efforts by Vought International and the Seven to ensure the safety of all citizens. Homelander himself was on the scene within minutes. Tifa stood crossed to the window and looked down at the block below. 3 men in tactical gear were loading someone into a white van. No sirens, no markings. The person they were loading had zip ties at the wrists and was moving the way people move when they've already stopped expecting help. A woman on the sidewalk watched, then looked away, then walked faster. Inside, the television kept going. The streets have never been safer. She'd been here 2 days. And she hadn't arrived with a plan. That was the honest version of it. One moment she was in Sector 7, the air thick with Mako and smoke and the particular weight of a city that ran on stolen energy. The next moment there was nothing. Not darkness, not transit, just a seam in the world that she'd stepped through without seeing it. And then this. A dumpster, a fire escape. A city that looked like Midgar's wealthier cousin who'd stopped returning calls. The first 6 hours she'd moved carefully, listened more than she looked, assessed without engaging the way she'd learned to do in Avalanche, in the years before Avalanche, in all the years of understanding that a room will tell you everything if you let it talk first. What this city told her slowly was this: the surface was intact. The surface was very, very intact. Billboard after billboard showed a blonde man in a blue and red suit, jaw set, eyes clear, one hand raised like he was receiving applause and giving a blessing at the same time. Homelander protects. The Seven serve. Vought cares. She'd stared at that last one for a while. Back home, Shinra had billboards too. Mako energy powering the future. She remembered being 8 years old, standing in Nibelheim reading that slogan on a glossy pamphlet some company rep had dropped. She remembered thinking it sounded nice. She'd stopped thinking it sounded nice by the time she was 15. Different city, same architecture of the lie. By the end of the first day, she'd mapped 6 blocks. A laundromat with bars on the windows. A convenience store where the owner watched the door more than the register. 3 street cameras mounted high on poles lenses, angled down and slightly south, covering the main intersection and the mouth of the alley beside the community center. A food cart that did good business until exactly 4 in the afternoon, when the vendor packed up fast, too fast, like someone who knew the shift change on a schedule he hadn't chosen. She ate twice, paid in the only bills she'd managed to find, stuffed behind a loose vent in her room, left there by someone who'd clearly needed a fast exit plan and hadn't needed the money more than the head start. She didn't feel guilty about it. She'd find a way to pay it back to someone. On the morning of the second day, she heard a man on the floor below her arguing through a phone voice dropping whenever he said certain words. Not curse words. Words like hearing and disappeared, and they said he resisted. She heard the phone call end. She heard him sit down hard on something. She heard him not say anything for a long time. She went back to the window. Down the block, the white van was parked again. Different street. Same absence of markings. The television was on in the bodega on the corner. She bought water and stood near the end of the aisle, watching the segment, without making it obvious she was watching. The anchor, different anchor, same smoothness, was reporting on what he called a security event in the warehouse district. The footage showed a building with broken windows and 3 people being walked out in cuffs, heads down. The chyron read, "Vought-assisted law enforcement operation, 3 suspected domestic terror affiliates in custody." Behind her, someone at the register murmured to someone else, "That's the Delfino family. They run the church over on 9th. The other person didn't answer. The anchor called it a clean operation. He looked directly into the camera when he said it. Tifa set the water down and bought it and left. She stood on the sidewalk in the early light, a city pressing its noise around her, and she thought of Cloud. Not with pain exactly, with the specific weight of distance that has no known measurement. She didn't know where she was in any navigable sense. She didn't know if this world had a Midgar or a planet or a Sephiroth or anything she recognized. She didn't know if there was a way back. She tucked the thought away the way she'd learned to tuck things away. Not buried, not ignored, just placed where it wouldn't pull at her hands while she was working. She was always working. There was always something in front of her that needed doing. And right now, what was in front of her was a block where a van with no markings kept parking. A neighborhood where people knew things and didn't say them. A television that called a church family domestic terrorists and expected everyone to nod. She wasn't going to nod. It happened at 11 in the morning on the second day while the light was still flat and the street was full enough that there were witnesses, but sparse enough that the witnesses were spread out and easy to manage. A family. Father, mother, 2 kids. The older one, maybe 12, the younger one, 7 or 8, carrying a backpack with a cartoon character on it that Tifa didn't recognize. They were walking toward a bus stop. The father had his hand on his son's shoulder in that particular way parents do when they're trying to seem casual and aren't. The van pulled up. 4 men got out. Tactical gear. No badges visible, no agency insignia. Nothing that would look bad on a clip if it was edited correctly. One of them addressed the father directly. The father shook his head. One of them grabbed his arm. The mother started to pull the kids back. They grabbed her too. The older kid, the 12-year-old, cried out loud, scared, and one of the men told him to shut up. And that was the moment Tifa was already moving. She didn't run. She'd learned that running made people freeze or scatter. She walked fast and with purpose, the way you walk when you know exactly where you're going. And the obstacle in your path is not a decision, just a thing to be handled. The first man turned when he heard her. She caught his wrist before he could say anything. Applied pressure to the joint, not breaking just enough, and guided his arm behind him in a way that dropped him to his knees on the asphalt without any drama. The second one came at her from the left. She stepped into it, redirected, used his own momentum to put him against the side of the van hard enough to take the wind out of him. The third and fourth hesitated. That hesitation lasted about a second. It was enough. She looked at the mother. "Your kids. Go. Now." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The mother moved first, that was always how it worked, the body deciding before the mind caught up. She grabbed the younger one and pulled. The father had the older kid's arm, and they were already moving, all 4 of them, streaming away from the vehicle and into the alley between the community center and the dry cleaner, which Tifa had already noted yesterday. Connected through to the next block via a loading dock that stayed unlocked during business hours. The third man came at her. She put him down. The fourth tried to get back in the van and call something in. She pulled him out before he reached the radio. Then she stepped back, looked at the four of them on the ground. None of them badly hurt, all of them going to be fine in 10 minutes and furious in 15. She turned and walked into the alley. She didn't follow the family. They didn't need a shadow. They needed distance. She watched from the far end of the block until she saw them turn onto a street where there were more people and more cameras and more witnesses, the kind of situation that made a second snatch harder to justify and harder to execute clean. Then she leaned against a wall in a doorway that smelled like old rain and cardboard. Somewhere across the city, a news helicopter she'd been hearing for the past hour changed course, moving toward this block, chasing the signal of something that had just become footage. She looked up at a sky the color of old concrete and thought very briefly, I need to find a way back. Then she thought, but not yet. Not while they're still parking that van. She pushed off the wall and moved. 3 blocks north, then east, then down a fire stair into a basement-level corridor that ran under 2 buildings and came out near the back of a Thai restaurant that opened for lunch in an hour. Behind her from somewhere, a phone was recording. She didn't know that yet. By the time she found out, the clip had 40,000 views. By the time Vaught's communications team finished their morning briefing, it had 200,000. By the time Ashley Barrett looked up from her desk and said very quietly, "Oh, this is a problem," it had passed 1 million, and the comments were already asking one question. Who is she? The top comment at the time. Ashley's assistant screenshotted it, read, "She's literally not real. There's no way." The second most liked said, "Vought plant. Obvious psyop. Do not trust." The third was a single word followed by 17 fire emojis. By noon, "Real hero" was trending in 4 cities. By 2 in the afternoon, a Vought PR account had posted a thread calling the woman in the clip an unregistered, unsanctioned individual whose actions put civilians at risk. Nobody in the comments believed it. That was the part that was going to be expensive. The meeting request came through a lawyer. Not directly, nothing Vought did was direct. It came through the building super, who came through a city housing coordinator who had apparently been informed by someone in a position to make a phone call that the woman staying in Unit 4C without a lease needed to speak with a representative from a nonprofit community safety initiative. The note was slipped under the door at 6 in the morning, printed on paper that cost more per sheet than most people in this neighborhood spent on lunch. Tifa read it once, set it on the mattress, got dressed. She went anyway. Not because the note persuaded her, because she wanted to see what they looked like up close. She picked daytime, a building she'd already walked past twice a block, busy enough that anything overt would come with witnesses. If they intended to move against her openly, they'd have done it on the street. This was a different kind of play, and different plays told you different things about who was running them. The location was a conference room on the 14th floor of a building that had no signage on the exterior and a lobby that looked like a dentist's office trying to seem expensive. 2 men in suits waited by the elevator. They didn't touch her. They'd been told something she guessed about what happened when people tried. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows facing east. A woman was already seated at the table, late 30s. Blazer the color of a bruise, starting to heal, hair pulled back with the precision of someone who had learned that appearing polished was a form of armor. She had a tablet in front of her and a smile that didn't use the muscles around her eyes. "Thank you for coming," the woman offered. "I'm Ashley. I handle strategy for—" "I know what you handle," Tifa answered. She sat down across the table, not because she was comfortable, because standing made people nervous in ways that shortened conversations, and she wanted this one to run its full length, so she could hear what they were actually offering. Ashley's smile stayed exactly where it was. Then you know we're not here to make threats. You're here to make an offer that makes threats unnecessary. A beat. Ashley set the tablet down flat. We can give you documentation, identity papers, legal status, a residential address that doesn't trace back to anything embarrassing. We can ensure that the family from yesterday isn't contacted again. She paused there, letting it land the implication that they could uncontact people the way you unring a bell. We can make this city very comfortable for you. And what does comfortable cost? You stay away from certain facilities. You don't speak to press. If you encounter a situation that requires a response, you route it through us. Ashley tilted her head slightly. We frame the narrative. You go about your life. Outside the windows, the city moved. Delivery trucks, pigeons on a ledge. A billboard 3 blocks away showed Homelander in 3/4 profile, chin-up light hitting him like it had been hired. Tifa looked at the billboard for a moment, then back at Ashley. The people in those facilities, she cut in. Did they do anything? Ashley's expression shifted, not much, just enough to confirm what the shift meant. That's a complex question with a lot of context. That, did they do anything? Silence. Back home, Tifa said, they at least didn't go on TV and call this helping people. She stood, pushed the chair in. No. Ashley's composure held, which was professional of her. I'd encourage you to think about what happens to people who don't take this kind of meeting seriously. I am thinking about it. Tifa picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. That's why I'm leaving. Sound. She was in the elevator when they tried. 2 men, not the suited ones from the lobby. Different ones, the kind whose jackets fit badly across the shoulders because of what they were carrying underneath. One of them put a hand on her arm. Firm. The kind of grip designed to steer rather than stop the first gesture in a sequence that ended with someone in a vehicle going somewhere they hadn't chosen. She read it correctly. This wasn't a real extraction. The building had too many cameras, the lobby too much foot traffic. This was a gauge-apply pressure measure, the reaction report back. Vought collected data the same way they collected everything else. Methodically. Tifa looked at the hand on her arm. She took his wrist, rotated it inward along the joint's natural axis until the grip broke and he was facing the elevator wall, then stepped clear as the second man reached for her. She caught his forearm on the way past, used the momentum he'd already committed to, and he met the floor of the elevator in a controlled drop loud enough to be unpleasant, careful enough that nothing broke. The doors opened on the lobby. She walked out. Neither man followed. At the revolving door, she passed a young woman in a Vought lanyard who was staring at her phone with an expression of concentrated alarm. On the screen, briefly visible, was a grid of thumbnails. The fan cam edits had already evolved into something more elaborate, composite cuts set to music, slow-motion segments of the rescue looped and color-graded into something that looked less like street footage and more like a trailer. One thumbnail showed a close crop of Tifa's face, mid-motion expression, flat and focused hair caught mid-swing. Someone had added text at the bottom in a heavy font, "She's actually real." Below that, in the comments, "National Waifu confirmed." And below that, a different account, "Vought plant, obvious COP, unregistered soupy confirmed threat." Tifa pushed through the revolving door and out into the street. By afternoon, the counter-campaign was already running. She caught fragments of it, the way you catch weather in pieces from multiple directions, nothing you could hold on to. A segment on a cable channel that used the word rogue 4 times in 90 seconds. A graphic that showed the still from the rescue clip, but cropped to remove the family entirely, leaving only Tifa standing over 2 men on the ground, which in that framing looked considerably less like a rescue and considerably more like something a prosecutor could work with. A text crawl on a news ticker. Unregistered enhanced individual spotted in multiple incidents, Vought urges caution. She bought food from a cart on the corner and ate standing up watching the ticker cycle. The vendor glanced at her sidelong, then at the ticker, then back at her food cart, very deliberately. She left a bigger tip than she'd planned. 2 blocks east, a clothing stall had already printed shirts. She didn't stop to look at them closely, but she caught the image, that same cropped frame from the fan cam, the flat expression hair mid-motion, and underneath it in block letters, something she couldn't read at this distance. There were 3 people looking at the shirts. One of them bought 2. This was the part she hadn't anticipated. Not the counter-campaign she'd seen Shinra run. That playbook had grown up. Watching Midgar's information ecosystem process inconvenient events into digestible product. What she hadn't anticipated was the speed. The way both things ran simultaneously, parallel tracks on the same infrastructure, the same face on a threat poster and a fan cam edit and a bootleg shirt within the same 12-hour window. Different world, faster machine. She spent the rest of the afternoon doing what she'd been doing before the meeting, mapping, watching, learning the shape of the neighborhood's fear. She found 2 more households where someone had recently disappeared. She found a corner store whose back room was being used as an informal intake point. People dropping off clothes and food for families whose breadwinners were away. The woman running it was in her 60s, moved like someone carrying weight she'd gotten used to, and did not ask Tifa any questions when Tifa helped carry boxes from a delivery van into the storage room. They come through here twice a week. The woman told her, not to Tifa exactly. More to the room. White trucks. No names on the side. Always around shift change. Do they always take the same people? Anyone who complained. Anyone who signed something they weren't supposed to sign. Anyone who knew someone who knew someone. She set a box down. Looked at Tifa directly for the first time. You're the one from the clip? Tifa didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. They're going to frame it worse, the woman said. They always frame it worse. Then people stop helping. I know. The woman studied her for a moment. You don't seem scared. I'm not? A pause. Outside, a truck rumbled past. The woman looked at the door, then back. There's a family on the 4th floor of the building next to the pharmacy, she said. They got a notice this morning. Sometimes that means a day. Sometimes it means tonight. Tifa picked up another box. Night. She got there before the white truck did. Barely. 20 minutes to spare, which was enough time to talk to the family, learn the shape of the exit route, and position herself at the point in the stairwell where she'd have angles on the front and side entrances simultaneously. The truck came. 4 men, same configuration as before, tactical gear, no insignia. The practiced efficiency of people who'd done this enough times. That the people they were collecting had stopped feeling like people. They didn't get past the ground floor. She didn't let it run long. 4 men, 11 seconds, no broken bones, everyone on the floor and staying there. The family was out the back and 2 blocks away before the men had gotten fully vertical again. She melted into a side street and kept moving north, putting distance between herself and whatever footage existed of the last 4 minutes. She was 3 blocks away when she heard faintly the sound of a phone camera clicking behind her. She didn't look back. By the time she turned onto a quieter street and stopped against the wall of a laundromat, the faded kind plastic chairs visible through the glass. One dryer making a noise that suggested it had been broken for 6 months, and everyone had simply agreed not to mention it. The clip was probably already uploading. Let them try to explain it. She didn't know that in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, Ashley Barrett was standing in front of a whiteboard with 3 words written on it, circled twice, underlined once. We brand her. Below that, a second line in different handwriting, added by someone who'd come in late and stood at the back of the room, or we build the case. The two sentences pointed in different directions. Ashley stared at both of them for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made a call she hadn't wanted to make to a person whose sign-off she hadn't wanted to need. 3 seconds of silence on the other end. Then a voice calm, warm, the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to perform patience because actual patience had never come naturally. How bad? 2 incidents now, Ashley noted. Both on camera? Both going the wrong way for us. Another pause. She turned down the offer, walked out. The voice on the line carried something underneath the calm, not anger exactly. Closer to the particular attention of someone who had just noticed a piece on the board they hadn't accounted for. Then we build the case. I want a file. Everything we have. The line went dead. Ashley lowered her phone, looked at the whiteboard. We build the case. In Vaught's experience, that phrase had only ever needed to end one way. Marvin Milk had been watching the building for 40 minutes when the woman walked past him for the second time. He clocked it on the first pass. She wasn't wandering, wasn't lost, wasn't one of the fan accounts that had started congregating near anything that might be Tifa adjacent since the clips went up. She moved with the deliberate non-urgency of someone who had already mapped the block and was now running a secondary check. He recognized the habit because it was his habit. He pulled out his phone and typed one line to Huey. She's right here, and she already burned us twice. Stay in the car. Then he got out of the van. Vaught's cleanup team had arrived at the bodega on 9th at 7 that morning. 4 people, not tactical, not uniformed, the administrative kind of dangerous. Clipboards. A lawyer in a charcoal suit who kept his phone face down on the counter whenever he was in the room with someone. They'd pulled the owner into the back, and 2 of them had fanned out to speak quietly with the 3 people who'd posted clips from the previous day's incident. Had watched all of this from a rented Toyota parked at the far end of the block. Frenchie was on the phone with him for part of it, talking through what they were seeing versus what Starlight had pulled from inside a preliminary file thin, but pointed the start of a paper architecture that would eventually describe a pattern of criminal behavior by an unregistered enhanced individual operating without sanction. They're not arresting people, Frenchie said. They're collecting statements. They want one consistent story with a locked timeline. Yeah. Watched the lawyer exit the bodega with a folder under his arm. I know how this goes. He'd seen it before. Not always with soups involved, but the mechanism was the same. Reshape the record while the record was still soft. Get to the witnesses before the witnesses had lawyers, before they'd compared notes, before they'd had time to remember clearly. Create enough paperwork that the truth became one version among several and stopped being the obvious one. The clipboard people left at 9:15. Was on the pavement at 9:17. He found her 3 blocks north, standing at the mouth of an alley, beside a dry cleaning shop, watching the far end of the street where 2 men in unmarked jackets were talking to a woman on her stoop. Not Vaught's cleanup crew, different people. The kind who didn't carry clipboards. The kind who used pressure differently. Stopped a few feet from her. Those 2 are going to tell her she imagined what she saw. Tifa didn't look at him. I know. We can get her out if you go left and I go right. There's a car 2 blocks over. My guy driving. We're out in 4 minutes. Now she looked at him, evaluating. The kind of look that didn't have an obvious tell she wasn't deciding whether to trust him exactly. More like she was deciding how much trust was operationally necessary. Who are you? She asked. Someone who's been watching Vaught do this for years. He paused. Someone who would like to get that woman off that stoop before those two decide she's a liability instead of a witness. She looked back at the stoop. Left, Tifa told him. She went left. He went right. The two men in unmarked jackets made it exactly as far as noticing something was wrong, before Tifa was close enough to matter. She didn't hit them, not that she needed to. She stepped between them and the woman on the stoop and stood there, which was apparently sufficient. Both men took inventory of her and found the math didn't work. "This is a private conversation," one of them announced. "It's a public stoop," Tifa said. The woman behind her spoke something in quick, frightened Spanish. was already there from the other side, keys in hand, speaking low and level. She came down the steps fast. Steered her toward the street. The two men looked at Tifa. She didn't move, didn't say anything else. She simply held the space between them and the stoop until MM's footsteps had faded half a block away, and then she turned and walked after him without hurrying. One of the men reached for his radio. She was already gone. The car was a dark blue sedan that smelled like fast food and old coffee, which was exactly the smell of every operational vehicle had ever run. Huey was in the passenger seat, turned around, doing the thing he always did when he was trying not to seem nervous, talking too specifically about practical details. "We've got water in the back. And there are granola bars, I think, unless Frenchie ate them, which he probably did. So maybe just the water." "Huey," said. "Right." The woman from the stoop sat between Tifa and the door, still breathing too fast, hands folded in her lap. Tifa said nothing. She didn't reach over to reassure her, didn't make a speech. She just sat with the steadiness of someone who'd been in the back of many vehicles under worse circumstances. And after about 90 seconds, the woman's breathing began to even out, which was usually how that particular kind of presence worked. Drove. "We've been tracking Vaught's pickup operations in Queens for 3 weeks. He told her, not looking back. "We know 6 locations where they're holding people. We have names on 4 of them." He let that sit. "We've also been monitoring the record they're building on you." Tifa looked at the back of his head. "How long have you been watching me? Since the first clip?" "That was 2 days ago. We move fast when we have to." A pause. The city moved past the windows, a corner bodega, a school with metal detectors at the entrance, a bus shelter with a Vought ad on the back panel, the 7. Always there. Huey stared at the ad for a second and then looked away. "What do you want?" Tifa pressed. "Same thing you want." Checked the mirror. "To get people out?" "That's not what I asked." He glanced back then. She was watching him with the same flat evaluation as before. He decided she'd earned a straight answer. "We want Vought accountable. Publicly. In a way they can't dissolve with a press release and a settlement." He pulled onto a broader street, heading east. "But we can't do that if they finish building their case against you first. Because once they do, everything you've done gets reframed as a criminal pattern, and everyone you've helped gets associated with it, and we lose the only clean footage of Vaught's people doing what they actually do." Silence from the back. Then, "Where are you taking her?" Tifa's eyes cut to the woman from the stoop. "Somewhere safe. Concrete building. Quiet street people we trust on the door." He paused. Frenchie's voice was still in his ear from that morning offhand in the way Frenchie said everything that was actually important. And if that Cape guy of theirs ever goes down hard, that room will hold something dangerous long enough to matter. Filed that observation away, same as he filed everything. "She'll be okay. So will the family we moved last week, and the 4 people before that." Tifa was quiet for a moment. "They'll edit whatever footage they have anyway." "Yeah." But there's a difference between editing around the truth and burying it entirely. Right now, the truth is still visible. He turned east onto a broader street. We'd like to keep it that way. The safe house was a converted loading bay on the eastern edge of Queens, poured concrete 2 entry points windows that started 6 feet off the ground and were covered with wire mesh that had been there since before anyone in the building had any particular reason to care about it. Butcher had always kept places like this. had stopped asking how many there were. Some questions about Butcher were more useful left open. Frenchie was inside, doing something technical with a laptop and 3 extension cords. He looked up when they came in, registered Tifa, and went back to his screen with the specific lack of reaction of a man who had decided to process that particular surprise later. The woman from the stoop was settled in the side room, given water, given a phone to call someone she trusted. Stood near the main door. Huey had stationed himself at a respectful distance from everyone the way he always did when things were still calibrating. Butcher arrived 8 minutes later. He came through the side entrance like he'd built the place himself, which he probably felt he had. He looked at Tifa the way he looked at all soups, not afraid, not respectful, just assessing, and already disagreeing with whatever he assessed. So, he looked at her. "You're the one who's been making our week considerably more complicated. You're the one who followed someone you haven't met into a building," Tifa said. "I don't follow people. I show up where things are happening." He looked at "She sign anything." "She didn't sign anything," cut in. "This isn't that kind of arrangement." Butcher turned back to Tifa. "Here's where we are, love. Vaught's building a case. We've got people inside who say the file's moving faster than usual, which means they've got something they want to use or something they want to make, which is usually the same thing. We can get you ahead of it, or we can watch you get eaten by it." He spread his hands, a gesture that was almost a shrug. "Up to you." Tifa looked at him for a moment. "3 things," Tifa said. Butcher waited. No one dies who doesn't have to. Rescuing people comes before any operation designed to expose Vought. And I make my own calls. She said it without emphasis, the same tone she'd used to describe an exit route. Those aren't negotiable. Butcher's expression shifted something between irritation and a kind of reluctant respect that he clearly didn't want to be feeling. That last one's going to make planning difficult. Then plan around it. Was watching Butcher, which was how managed most interactions with Butcher, attentive ready. Butcher held eye contact with Tifa for 3 more seconds, then looked at then back at her. "Fine." He didn't say it like agreement. He said it like a starting position. "But when this goes loud, and it will go loud, I need to know you're not going to pull punches because somebody's got a camera pointed at you." "I don't pull punches," Tifa said. "I just don't throw them at people who aren't threats." Butcher almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere useful. Right then, "Frenchie, tell her what we've got." Tink. What they had was a list. Frenchie pulled it up on the screen. Not the whole thing, just the architecture of it. 12 names in the current batch framed as affiliates of a domestic extremist network that did not exist. The paperwork was already in motion. Signed statements, evidence photos, a chain of custody that would look airtight to anyone who didn't know it had been built in reverse. 4 of them are in a facility 20 minutes from here, Frenchie said. They have been there between 6 and 11 days. 2 of the 12 are people who filmed the first rescue. 3 are family members of people who signed complaints. They go after families, Huey said to nobody in particular, in the tone of someone who had known this and still found it difficult to hear confirmed again. Tifa studied the screen. "Can you get me floor plans?" "Give me 3 hours," Frenchie said. 2. Frenchie looked at his laptop, then back at her. 2.5. "Fine." Starlight called in while Frenchie was working her voice through the phone, small and precise, reporting on what she'd pulled from inside. She confirmed the file was moving up the chain. She also confirmed something else, that the next phase wasn't just about Tifa. Vought was planning a public operation, a broadcast event, a reason for the Seven to be seen doing something. "They're going to bring Homelander in," she reported. "They want it on camera. They want him to be the one who stops you." Silence in the room. "When?" MM asked. "They haven't locked a date. But the file needs to be complete first. Which means they need one more incident, something they can tie to you, something that looks bad. They'll manufacture it if they have to." Huey looked at Tifa. Tifa looked at the list on the screen. "Then we move before they do," Tifa said. MM nodded. Butcher didn't answer, but he stopped leaning against the wall, which was how EMM knew. He agreed. In the city outside, 3 blocks from the safe house, a van with no markings idled at a light. The driver was watching his phone, not a fan cam, not a news alert. A live map. A signal trace. The kind of thing you ran when a file was nearly complete and you needed one more piece to make it close properly. The light changed. The van moved. The production crew had been on site since 4 in the afternoon. By 8:30, they had 3 camera positions, locked 2 lighting rigs, adjusted twice, because the first configuration made the holding area look too much like what it was, and a teleprompter screen angled so that Homelander could read from it without appearing to read from it. The director, a man named Gerald, who had spent 11 years doing Vought events and had learned to frame things so that the ugliest moments looked like resolution, walked the floor one more time and decided the angle on camera 2 needed to come left by 6 degrees. "Left," he told the operator. The operator adjusted. Gerald looked at the monitor. The 4 people seated in restraints at the back of the platform were now in the peripheral frame, rather than the center, present enough to establish stakes distant enough that their expressions wouldn't compete with Homelander's entrance. The lighting on them was flat. The lighting on the podium was warm. "Better?" Gerald stepped back from the monitor. In the production truck 300 feet away, Ashley was on her second call of the last 20 minutes. The first had been to the network. The second was to someone whose name didn't appear on the organizational chart. "We're on schedule," she said. "The package is loaded. All 4 subjects are compliant." She paused to listen. "Homelander is being briefed now." Another pause, shorter. "I understand. Yes. We keep rolling regardless of what happens." She ended the call, looked at the 6 monitors arrayed in front of her. One of them was showing a live feed from a news drone positioned half a mile out. Not Vought's drone and network affiliates, which had arrived uninvited, and which Vought's legal team had spent 40 minutes trying to get grounded and had failed to because the airspace wasn't theirs to close. She looked at that feed for a moment. "Let it run," Ashley said to no one in particular. "More angles, better coverage. If this goes the way it's supposed to go, we want as many cameras as we can get." Homelander arrived at 8:42. He came in from the north end of the platform, which meant the crowd saw him before the cameras did. Which was by design, because the crowd's reaction was the first frame of the broadcast, and a crowd seeing him for the first time always produced something that looked like awe, even when it was mostly just shock. He was wearing the suit. He was always wearing the suit. The cape moved with him in a way that suggested intention rather than wind. He smiled at the crowd. The smile was very good. He'd been doing it for years. An aide with a tablet fell into step beside him and spoke quietly for 30 seconds. Homelander nodded at intervals, not processing exactly more, like acknowledging that information was being delivered. His eyes were moving across the platform, the crowd, the camera positions, the holding area where 4 people sat in restraints under flat lighting. His eyes stopped briefly at the crowd massed at the eastern cordon. The signs, the phones, the banner that someone had managed to get printed in under 24 hours. She's coming. She's coming. The aide added something else. Homelander's smile didn't change, but something at the edge of his jaw did. "I'm aware," Homelander replied. He took the podium. The broadcast opened at 9 o'clock with a VOT graphic and a legal disclaimer that ran for 4 seconds and contained the phrase, "alleged activities," twice. Then the feed cut to Gerald's camera, one wide shot Homelander at the podium, the city skyline visible through the open end of the warehouse structure. The 4 restrained figures arranged in the background like punctuation. "Good evening." His voice carried the particular warmth of someone who had decided that warmth was his most effective instrument. "What you're about to see isn't easy. It's not supposed to be. When threats emerge from within our own communities, it requires courage not just from those of us who protect you, but from all of us who choose to face the truth rather than look away." He let that breathe for 3 seconds. "Tonight, VOT International, in coordination with federal partners, has taken into custody 4 individuals whose planned activities would have put thousands of American lives at risk." Cut to camera 3, the holding area. Tight on one face, the transit worker 43 who had been coached to look down. He was looking down. The lighting made him look guilty in the specific way that flat lighting makes everyone look guilty. Cut back to Homelander. These aren't faceless threats. They're people who made a choice, and sometimes protecting those you love means making hard choices too. In the production truck, Ashley watched the numbers. 9.3 million concurrent viewers at the 30-second mark, trending in 14 cities. The sentiment tracker on the secondary monitor was running at 68% engaged, which was 6 points above their target. She allowed herself a single nod. On the secondary feed, the network affiliate's drone, a small disturbance registered at the southern perimeter, something moving through the cordon line. Gerald caught it on his peripheral monitor and reached for his radio to ask someone to investigate, then stopped because the figure was already through. And because something about the way it moved made him set the radio down and just watch. Tifa had come in from the south. Not because the south was easier, it wasn't. It had the densest cluster of VOT security contractors. 3 cameras and a chain link section that had been reinforced with a steel bar that probably weighed 60 kilograms. It was because the south was where they weren't looking. Their attention was on the crowd at the eastern cordon, on the broadcast going out on the podium, and the lighting and the numbers rolling in from the sentiment tracker. The south perimeter was infrastructure, not performance. Nobody famous came from the south. She went through the chain link at the reinforced section. The steel bar bent. She moved past it. The 2 contractors nearest the south entrance registered her at approximately the same moment. One of them had his radio up before she reached him. She closed the distance in 4 steps, redirected the radio arm, placed him against the fence in a way that was loud but not injurious, and took the radio. The second one reached for something at his belt. She caught his wrist on the extension, stepped through the grip, and he sat down on the concrete in the slightly stunned manner of someone who had not anticipated the ground arriving that quickly. She set both radios on the fence post. 6 seconds. She kept moving. The platform had 3 approaches. She'd taken the layout from Frenchie's render and run it until it was automatic left approach, covered by camera. 2 in 1, contractor standing post to center was the podium, and Homelander, and every lens in the building right approach was a loading corridor that connected to the holding area through a fire door that would be locked from the inside but Not from the outside, because Gerald's crew had propped it for cable routing. She went right. The fire door opened. She was in the holding area. 4 people. Zip ties at the wrists, seated on folding chairs, bolted to a metal frame that had probably been chosen because it photographed like a detention setup. 1 guard at the near corner, another at the far. Both of them registered her arrival at approximately the same moment as each other, which was approximately 2 seconds too late. She didn't explain herself. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a version of an explanation that would help. Near guard wrist lock rotated, guided to the floor. Far guard, he moved toward her, which simplified things. She stepped into his approach, used the gap, and he folded at the knees and stayed there. 8 seconds. She pulled a multi-tool from the pouch at her hip and cut the zip ties, starting with the transit worker because he was closest. "There's a door behind you," she said. "Corridor. Someone at the end of it with a vehicle. Move." One of the college students, a young woman, maybe 20, still running on adrenaline and confusion, looked at her and said, "Are you... move?" Tifa said. They moved. And Frenchie's voice came through the earpiece she'd taken it from EM at the perimeter, a concession she hadn't planned to make and had made anyway, because he'd been right that communication mattered in a building this size. "Camera 2 has you," Frenchie reported. "Gerald is redirecting. You have maybe 40 seconds before they reposition the main feed." "How many out?" "MM confirms 3. 4th is at the corridor door." "Good." Outside on the main broadcast feed, the cut happened at 9:17. Gerald, operating on reflex, built from 11 years of VOD events, did what he always did. When something unplanned entered the frame, he cut to Homelander. Because Homelander was always the answer, because whatever was happening could be contextualized if Homelander was looking at it with the right expression. Homelander was already looking. He'd heard the guards go down. Not that it was loud, but he heard everything in a building this size had heard it the moment she came through the south perimeter and had been standing at the podium with his smile intact for the last 40 seconds, while something he hadn't expected moved through the building behind him. Now the holding area was empty. He turned from the podium slowly, deliberately. The cameras followed because they always followed. "Well," he turned from the podium, not to the crowd, not to the broadcast, to the space at the back of the platform where Tifa was now standing, having come back through the fire door, the 4 people behind her, and moving toward the loading corridor where MM was waiting. She'd made sure they were through before she turned back. He saw that. He'd been watching the whole time. And he saw exactly what she'd done. Rescued them first, then turned around the 4 of them, already past the cordon line and gone. Somewhere beyond the south wall, a vehicle door slammed and an engine pulled away. The sound was faint inside the warehouse, but he heard it. She'd waited for it too. He could tell by when she turned. "You know there are 9 million people watching this," he said. His voice was still warm. The warmth was doing significant work now. Tifa looked at him across the platform. The distance between them was maybe 40 feet. The lighting was all on him. She was at the edge of it, at the boundary where Gerald's warm-toned podium light fell off into the flat industrial dark of the warehouse. She didn't answer. In the production truck, Ashley's voice came through Gerald's headset. "Keep rolling." Gerald kept rolling. On the broadcast, on the affiliate drone feed on every phone in the crowd at the eastern cordon, 9 million concurrent and climbing Homelanders stood at the podium, and Tifa stood at the edge of the light, and neither of them moved. "No civilians," Tifa said. It was barely loud enough to reach the nearest microphone. The sound engineers in the truck caught it on the ambient feed. It went out on the broadcast with a half-second delay. 9 million people heard it. Homelander's smile, for the first time since he'd taken the podium, arrived at the edge of what it was covering. Smile. The warmth in his voice was doing a lot of work now. We're live. She didn't smile. Good. She held his gaze. Don't blink. In Gerald's monitor, the wide shot framed them both, him at the lit podium, her at the dark edge, the empty chairs behind her where 4 people had been sitting 60 seconds ago. He didn't cut. Wide shot was the safest call when you didn't know who was about to do something irreversible. Cut too early and you missed it. Cut too late and you'd owned it. He held the frame and let it run. The comments on the broadcast feed were moving at a rate the moderation team had stopped trying to manage. 2 trending tags had appeared in the last 45 seconds. One of them was Vought's. One of them wasn't. Homelander looked at the empty chairs. He looked back at Tifa. The warmth in his voice was still there. But it was load-bearing now. It was the only thing between the expression on his face and what 9 million people were going to think about it. You have no idea, he told her, what you just walked into. Tifa looked at him. I know exactly what I walked into, she said. I just walked out of it. The crowd at the eastern cordon heard the lights go out before they saw it happen. There was a deep, mechanical thud from inside the warehouse. The kind of sound that isn't loud, so much as felt, and then the 3 banks of production lighting that had been washing the exterior in warm, broadcast-grade illumination simply stopped. The building went dark at its edges. Emergency strips along the roofline kicked in half a second later, casting everything in the pale institutional glow of a place that had stopped pretending to be a television set. In the production truck, Ashley's hand hit the console. What just happened to my power? The answer came from 3 people at once, none of them saying the same thing. Keep rolling. Ashley cut across all of them. Emergency battery on camera 1. Where's camera 2? Still up. Then we have a show. Keep it running. Tifa had found the secondary distribution panel behind the northeast support column 4 minutes earlier, during the window between Homelander turning from the podium and his first attempt to reframe what was happening for the broadcast. She hadn't destroyed it. Destruction took longer and made noise in an uncontrolled direction. She'd pulled the 2 main breakers and zip-tied the housing shut, using a restraint from the contractor kit one of the security team had left on the ground when they started drifting, which took 11 seconds and produced no sound worth noticing. That was the lights. The camera boom was next, a telescoping arm mounted to a wheeled base positioned to give Gerald an overhead angle on the holding area that would have made any action there look contained and official. The base had locking wheels. She released the locks, walked the entire rig 4 meters toward the south wall, and tipped it in a controlled fall against the structural steel there. Behind her, Homelander was telling the nearest functioning camera something about due process and the necessity of difficult decisions in difficult times, which meant he was occupied and which meant she had the 4 seconds she needed. The arm bent. The head cracked. The feed from that angle went to static in the production truck. Gerald's voice in Ashley's ear. I've lost overhead. I have 2 cameras left and 9 million people watching, Ashley told him. Figure it out. The security contractors, 8 of them positioned around the interior perimeter, had understood with the pragmatic clarity of people paid to assess risk rather than absorb it, that the situation had moved past their operational parameters approximately 90 seconds ago. Most of them had begun drifting toward the exits in the specific way that was technically still maintaining position and was actually putting distance between themselves and whatever was about to happen. Tifa helped 3 of them make the decision faster. Not violently, she walked toward them with the same purposeful non-urgency she'd used on the street 3 days ago, and the geometry of a person moving toward you, who you know can put you through a wall, moving toward you at exactly the pace that says, this isn't aggression, it's just physics, tends to be persuasive. All 3 cleared the interior perimeter in under 20 seconds. The remaining 5 had already gone. She crossed to the propane manifold, running the heating units along the north wall, a row of 4 cylinders, valves, up pressure gauges, reading full. She didn't need to do anything dramatic. She closed the valves on each one, disconnected the feed lines at the regulator fittings, and rolled all 4 cylinders on their bases toward the exterior door, which she opened and held as they went through. Someone outside called out, "What the?" "Move them to the far end of the lot," she told whoever was closest. "Now." They moved them. The exterior door closed. Behind her, the warehouse had become a different kind of space. 40% of its interior volume was now lit only by the emergency strips and whatever came through the open structural gaps near the roofline. The camera boom was down. The propane was out. The security presence was negative. The 4 people who'd been restrained in the holding area were in MM's van, which she'd heard pull away 8 minutes ago, and she'd confirmed with a glance at the loading corridor entrance that the fire door on that end had swung shut and latched. No civilians. She turned back toward the center of the space. Homelander had not moved from the area near the podium. He had been watching all of this. He tried to watch it in the way you watch something you're pretending isn't happening, with the practiced lateral attention of someone whose main job was appearing unperturbed, but the booth lights failing, and the camera arm going down, and the contractors clearing the space had stacked up in a way that made pretending increasingly resource-intensive. He was still performing. Technically, there were 2 cameras left, and both of them were still running, and his posture at the podium was still the posture of a man in control of a situation. But the jaw had been ticking for 6 minutes now, and his eyes had been tracking Tifa's movements with the focused attention of someone who had stopped processing her as a disruption and started processing her as something else. "This is getting a little theatrical," he said at full broadcast volume to the remaining camera. "But that's fine. We can work with theatrical." Ashley's voice in the earpiece that was still functioning. "Good. Stay on message. Keep it light." "I'm very light," Homelander said. Then dropping the volume by exactly the amount that took it off the broadcast mic, but kept it audible across the empty floor. "Are you done?" Tifa looked at him from across the space. "Yes," she said. He heard the word land differently than he'd expected. Not defiance, not performance, just a factual answer to a factual question. And what it meant was that she'd done what she needed to do, and now there was nothing left to manage. The space was prepared. The people were gone. The variables had been removed. She'd been waiting for him. He processed that for 1 second. Then he did what he'd been wanting to do since she walked in through the south perimeter. He launched, straight up using the height of the warehouse interior, about 20 meters to the roof beams, and came down at her in a line that would have had the kinetic force of a vehicle at speed. She read the arc in the first half-second. She moved left, used the angle of a support column to break her path from his, and his impact hit the concrete floor 4 feet from where she'd been standing. The floor cracked in a ring. Dust went up. He came out of the crater in the ground, already moving. The next 40 seconds were what happened when someone who could level a building met someone who had spent her life learning exactly how to make that not matter. He was fast. He hit hard. Every strike landed with the force of something that should have ended the exchange immediately, and none of them connected because she was never where they arrived. She moved in the gaps between his swings inside his reach, at the lines that required him to reset, and gave her a fraction of a second to set position. She wasn't swinging back yet. She was deciding how to end it in one sequence, reading the tells, in his movement the micro-hesitations, before the big strikes, the way he favored his right shoulder on the downswing. You didn't rush the finish when the finish needed to be final. He pulled back and went airborne again, higher this time past the roof beams and out through a structural gap into the open air above the warehouse. The two remaining cameras lost him. Ashley made a sound in Gerald's headset that Gerald would describe later to no one as the sound of someone watching money evaporate. From above, Tifa heard and felt, in the way you feel things that happen above the threshold of normal air pressure, the temperature shift that preceded a heat vision discharge. She was already moving. She cut left then hard right, using the wreckage of the camera boom base as a low barrier to force his aim angle upward. The discharge hit the steel wall 12 feet above her head and left a glowing scar in the metal. She didn't stop moving. She closed the distance to the wall, went up it 3 steps, using the irregular surface of the weld seams and a horizontal brace as footholds, and pushed off the top brace at an angle that brought her level with the roofline gap he'd come through. He was coming back down. She caught him on the way. Not a full exchange, she redirected his descent, used his own downward force to spin his angle, and he hit the floor again, but sideways this time, which was different from the way he'd intended to land, and clearly communicated that to his expression. He came up faster than the floor recovered. His eyes had changed. The thing that had been underneath the performance all evening was now on top of it. "You think this is a fight?" His voice had dropped out of broadcast register entirely. No warmth, no weight behind the performance. Just the sound of someone who had not been spoken to this way by a space in a very long time. "I can level this building." "Go ahead," Tifa said. She was 12 feet away and not moving back. "You won't. There's still a camera running, and you know what happens to the story when you level a building on a live feed." Something moved in his face. In the production truck, Ashley was watching camera 2's feed, Yaiki, now the operator, having abandoned the fixed position and gone handheld to try to keep up with what was happening. The frame kept losing them and finding them. The numbers on the concurrent viewer count had crossed 14 million 30 seconds ago and had not stopped climbing. "Stay on it." Her voice was very controlled. "Whatever happens, stay on it." Gerald, who had been doing this for 11 years, looked at the monitor showing camera 2's feed and stayed quiet. He was thinking about the line between covering a story and being responsible for one, which was a line he'd crossed before and was possibly crossing again, and which he had learned not to examine too closely during the actual crossing. The feed stayed up. On it, Homelander, standing at the center of a space he'd built to be his, and which had become, in the last 12 minutes, definitively not. The lighting was wrong. The geometry was wrong. The script was gone. And across from him, 12 feet away, in the pale emergency glow, a person who had not raised her voice once since she walked in through the south perimeter. He looked at the camera. He looked back at her. "You have no idea what I can do," he told her. It came out wrong. Too fast, too high. Not the tone of someone making a statement, the tone of someone who needed to be believed. Tifa's expression didn't change. He moved first. He came in without the voice. That was the first thing that was different. Every prior exchange, the podium, the empty chairs, the building threats had carried the practiced register of someone performing for a feed. Now, there was nothing behind the sound except velocity. He crossed the distance between them in under a second right fist, driving at her sternum with the force of something that had ended every previous encounter it had been aimed at. She wasn't there. She'd read the shoulder rotation in the half step before his weight committed the same right shoulder tell she'd cataloged during the first exchange inside the warehouse, and she'd already shifted her center left by 8 inches, which was exactly enough. His fist went past her. She caught his extended arm at the elbow joint, redirected the carry-through, and used the momentum he had already spent to send him past her in a quarter turn that put him facing the wrong direction. He spun back fast. Faster than most things she'd fought. She was already in a new position, weight distributed, hands up, watching him recalibrate. He tried again. Shorter arc, this time tighter, compensating for the overextension. He'd learned something from the first exchange, which meant he was paying attention, which meant this was going to require more than reading his habits. She met the second strike differently. She didn't redirect it, she stopped it. Both forearms up, angled to distribute force across the joint, rather than absorb it at one point. The impact hit like something structural, giving way. She felt it in her shoulders, down through her stance. But her feet didn't move. He felt that too. His eyes registered it, the way eyes register arithmetic that produces an unexpected result. He pulled back for a third approach, and she stepped into his reset, which was the wrong moment for him to be retreating, because it meant she was already inside his reach, before he'd made a decision about what to do with it. She drove the heel of her palm into his chest. He went backwards 6 feet and hit the interior wall hard enough to bow the steel cladding. Dust came off the ceiling. He peeled off the wall. There was something different about his expression now. The performance scaffolding that had been holding his face in a shape recognizable as Homelander had developed significant structural issues. What was underneath wasn't rage exactly. It was something rawer than rage. The specific look of someone who has spent years using a room and has just discovered the room doesn't work that way anymore. "You think you're the first person to—" "No," Tifa answered. He stopped. Nobody cut him off. It wasn't a thing that happened. He stood against the bowed wall and processed the syllable, and something in his jaw went tight in a way that had nothing to do with performance. He went up. Fast, not the measured vertical launch he'd used earlier, but a full-speed ascent that punched through the structural gap in the roofline and cleared the building entirely. In the production truck, the handheld operators swung the camera up and caught nothing but the gap and the dark sky above it. Ashley's voice. "Where is he?" "Get me eyes." "He's outside the building." "Then get outside the building." On the affiliate drone feed, still running, still transmitting the only elevated angle left in the coverage. Homelander was visible at approximately 60 meters, hovering over the warehouse roof. He was looking down. His posture from above had the quality of someone reconsidering something they'd committed to, which was a posture Homelander had very rarely needed. The temperature shift came before the discharge, same as before. The heat vision was brighter outside the building. No walls to diffuse it, 2 parallel lines of light that carved down through the roof gap and hit the concrete 6 feet from where Tifa had been standing. She'd been watching the gap in the ceiling. She knew the arc he'd need to fire through it, and she'd already moved perpendicular, putting the base of the downed camera boom between herself and the most probable entry angle. The discharge hit behind her and to her left. The heat crossed the back of her arm. She felt the sleeve singe, pulled the arm in, close, and kept moving. She didn't stop. She went up the wall the same way she'd done it before, weld seams horizontal. Braced the 3-step sequence that got her to the roofline in 4 seconds and came through the gap. He was repositioning. He'd expected to fire again from his second angle and hadn't anticipated her being at roof level when he turned for it. She was 8 feet below him and coming up. He pulled higher. She watched him assess the distance. She was still rising, using the last of the wall momentum to add a meter, and saw the exact moment he decided that going higher wasn't going to solve it. She was too close. The discharge at this range would hit the roof structure, and there were buildings on 3 sides with occupied windows, and even Homelander had a line somewhere in his cost-benefit between what I want to do and what I can do on a live feed with a building full of people 4 blocks away. He came back down instead. She was ready for that. She met him on the descent, not blocking, not catching, but intercepting his line of travel with her own and redirecting his angle toward the warehouse roof surface rather than back up into open air. He hit the roof line, and they both came through the gap together, which was loud and fast, and exactly the kind of moment Gerald, watching the handheld feed from below, later said he almost cut then didn't, because you can't cut something like that. They landed on the interior. Her feet found purchase. His did not. She'd controlled the angle of re-entry so that his momentum was still partially lateral. And lateral on bantining means instability, and instability in a fight means the next 2 seconds belong to whoever is already balanced. Those 2 seconds belong to Tifa. He was up fast, but not before she'd closed an established inside position closer than reach inside the radius, where his advantages stopped being advantages and became hindrances. Because power at close range needs space to generate, and she was occupying all of it. He tried to create distance. She didn't let him. She took 3 hits in the next 7 seconds. She felt all 3. 2 of them she absorbed through positioning. Angled away force, distributed across a broader surface. And one of them connected directly and moved her a step back, which was 1 step further than she'd wanted. She reset. He was already pushing the gap. She stopped pushing back and let him close, which was not what he expected. And in the half-second that his body was still carrying the aggression of an advance that had suddenly found no resistance, she set her stance loaded through her legs and drove an uppercut into his jaw from beneath his guard. His head snapped back. The sound it made was not the sound of something that had ever happened to him before. He stayed on his feet. She hadn't expected otherwise, but his hands dropped 3 inches, and in combat, that distance is geological. She hit him twice more in the same sequence, working the body. Because the suit absorbed less there, and on the 3rd strike she switched targets. Elbow delivered horizontally, catching him across the ear with the full torque of her shoulder and hip, and in the approximately 6 years of daily technical work that had gone into making that precise motion automatic. He went sideways. He didn't fall. He caught himself on one knee, right hand, down on the concrete left hand, up in something that might have been a guard, and might have been an attempt to find the room that had stopped working right. His head was down. He was breathing hard. She could hear it across the 8 feet between them, ragged in a way that had nothing to do with performance. He looked up. There was something on his upper lip. He didn't know what it was yet. He ran his tongue across it, and then he knew, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment, the fraction of a second between knowing and choosing how to react, was the most honest expression she'd seen from him since she walked in. Pure, uncomplicated shock. "You're," he started. "Done." She stepped back. "Stay down." He looked at the camera. Camera 2, still running, still transmitting the operator, having backed up against the far wall and gone completely still, because instinct had correctly identified that moving was dangerous and staying invisible was safe. The lens was pointed directly at him. 14 million people and rising were watching his face. His face at this particular moment was not doing what it was supposed to do. He started to rise. She stepped forward and put him back down. Not a strike this time. She got behind his shoulder, used his own attempt to stand against him, and guided him back to the ground in a controlled descent that left him face down on the concrete, with his arm behind his back and her knee on the point between his shoulder blades. It was the position you put someone in when you wanted them to stay exactly where they were and didn't want to cause any more damage than was necessary to accomplish that. He was strong enough to break out of it if he committed fully. She knew that. She applied enough pressure to make the cost of trying extremely clear, and she waited. He could have fought the hold. He couldn't fight the cameras. Every move he made from this position would look like exactly what it was, and what it was losing. He stopped. "Stay down." Same volume, same tone. The statement of a fact, not a threat. He stayed. In the production truck, nobody was speaking. The viewer count was at 19 million, and the comments had passed the threshold where the moderation team had stopped trying to categorize them and were just logging volume. The trending tags had reorganized entirely. 3 of the top 5 were variations on what had just happened, rather than what Vought had planned. One of them was hashtag Homelander is bleeding. One of them was the tag that had been running since the first clip, still there, still climbing. Ashley was looking at the monitor showing camera 2's feed, and she was very still. Gerald looked at her. "Do you want me to cut?" Ashley held for 4 seconds. No. She hadn't taken her eyes off the monitor. "We cut now, and everyone's first question is what we didn't want them to see." Outside the production truck, the affiliate drone was still transmitting. It had repositioned during the fight to an angle above the warehouse's structural gap, and its feed now showed from 60 meters up through the gap in the roof, Homelander's figure on the ground and Tifa's figure above him, the relative geometry of the two of them, communicating something that no amount of editing was going to reframe tonight. The clip would be screenshot at this exact angle approximately 400,000 times in the next 30 minutes. Frenchie's voice came through Tifa's earpiece. "MM says the street is clear. Everyone's out. The cordon on the east side is breaking. People are leaving." She acknowledged with a tap on the earpiece. She looked down at Homelander. He was conscious. She'd made sure of that. She hadn't needed him unconscious. She'd needed him stopped, and there was a difference that mattered to her. His breathing had evened out. His arm still held, had gone entirely passive. One side of his face was pressed against the floor, and his eyes were open, tracking the camera operator who had not moved in the last 90 seconds. 19 million. Very quietly. Not to her, to himself, or to the camera, or to something he was trying to reconcile that wasn't reconciling. "Yeah," Tifa said. She stood, released his arm, stepped back. He stayed on the ground, not because she was holding him, because the architecture of getting up, deciding how to do it, deciding what his face would look like while he did it, deciding what the story was, had become a problem with no immediately available solution. He lifted his chin, once looked at the camera operator, then set his chin back down. Not yet. Not like this. The warehouse was very quiet. She turned. Butcher was already inside. She didn't know when he'd come in. He'd moved very quietly for someone wearing boots on concrete, which said something about how long he'd been practicing at this. He was standing 10 feet away, and he had the look he always had when an opportunity arrived that he'd spent years trying to create focused and certain and already decided. His eyes went to Homelander on the ground, then to Tifa. "Step aside." Butcher told her. She didn't. She turned to face him completely, putting herself between him and the man on the floor. And she looked at Butcher with the same expression she'd used on the men outside the bodega in Sector 7 on the first day, not threatening, not asking, just occupying the space and making clear that the space was occupied. "He's down," Tifa said. "That's not the same thing as done," Butcher replied. "Tonight it is." He held her gaze. Behind her, she heard the sound of Homelander beginning the slow, effortful business of deciding to sit up. Butcher heard it too. Something moved through his expression. Calculation, frustration, and below both of those, something older and harder that he was currently choosing not to act on. "You're making a mistake," Butcher told her. "Maybe," Tifa said, "but not the one you're about to make." MM arrived through the south entrance 17 seconds later. He took in the scene in one sweep, Homelander upright, but not standing, Tifa and Butcher 4 feet apart, neither of them having moved. He looked at Tifa. She looked at him. "We have a window," MM cut in. 20 minutes before their response team gets here. If we're moving him, it's now." Tifa looked back at Butcher. Butcher looked at Homelander, then at Tifa, then at MM. "Fine," he said. The word had acquired a new weight since the first time he'd said it. This time it sounded like something swallowed. Had the van at the south exit before the last echo of the fight had finished moving through the warehouse structure. That was the thing about He didn't wait for confirmation. He watched the feed on his phone, saw the drone angle shift to the overhead shot of two figures at a specific geometric relation to each other, and he was already moving before the clip finished loading. Huey was with him. Neither of them spoke about what they'd just watched. There wasn't a version of talking about it that would have helped. The south door opened. Tifa came through first. She was moving at a pace that read as fine, and that she was going to keep it that way, and that the back of her left sleeve was singed, and she'd deal with that later. Behind her, Butcher had Homelander by one arm, not supporting him exactly, more like steering something that wasn't fully coherent yet about its direction. Homelander was upright, which was more than Butcher had wanted, and less than he'd expected. In the back, Not a question. They put him in the cargo section of the van. A panel van interior cleared two tie-down rails running along the sides that had been installed 2 months ago for a different operation, and which were still there because, with the boys, things were always useful again eventually. Butcher ran 2 cargo straps across Homelander's arms and chest, anchored them to the rails, and cinched them tight enough to hold a wrecked engine block. Homelander looked at the ceiling of the van. "This is," he started. "Don't," Butcher told him. He tried to tense against the straps. They bit into his ribs, and the breath wouldn't come right. Not enough space, not enough clearance. Nothing to push against that wasn't already pushing back. He went still. Tifa crouched at the van's rear door and looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she stood, took the door and closed it. The latch caught. Was already driving. And they had 17 minutes before Vought's response team reached the industrial site. Frenchie had the timeline running on his laptop in the safe house, cross-referenced against the scanner feed from 2 frequencies Starlight had handed them 6 weeks ago. He watched the units converge on the warehouse coordinates and did the arithmetic on routes and speeds, which gave them 11 minutes of margin if the van hit 3 of the 4 green lights between the site and the safe house, which it did because drove the way he did everything without drama and without error. Ashley Barrett at this point was standing in front of a whiteboard that had not been this blank in a long time. The feeds were gone. She'd cut her own when the overhead angle hit 2 seconds too late, which meant the screen cap had already propagated to every mirror site. The moderation team tracked +17. They didn't. The affiliate drone was still transmitting because the affiliate's legal counsel had very quickly and very correctly determined that what they had was the most significant footage acquired by any news organization in the current decade, and that cutting it voluntarily would be a decision their grandchildren would be asking about. She had a phone in each hand. "I need a statement in 4 minutes," Ashley told the room. Ambush narrative. "We were conducting a legitimate operation and were attacked by an unregistered enhanced individual working with a known extremist cell." She pointed at one person. "Get the file on the boys. Whatever we have on them, I want it time-stamped and formatted for release in the next 15 minutes. She pointed at another. "And I need Homelander's location. If he's not transmitting, ping his suit." The suit wasn't transmitting. The left shoulder seam had been compromised, torn at the weld point during the re-entry impact in the warehouse, or when Tifa had controlled the descent, or possibly both, and whatever had been embedded there was no longer doing what it had been designed to do. Nobody in the room was quite sure of the exact moment. The result was the same. Ashley looked at the blank whiteboard. "Okay." She capped the marker. "We work with what we have." Outside the safe house, the block was quiet in the specific way that blocks get quiet when something has happened nearby that hasn't fully arrived yet. A few cars, a light on in the corner building. The sound of a television through a window 2 floors up running the 11 o'clock news, which was currently devoted entirely to one subject. Inside, Frenchie had the secondary room ready. It was the room had described in the van 3 days ago, the one Butcher had kept, the one that had held more inconvenient things than it had been designed, to the one that had poured concrete walls and a ceiling low enough to feel intentional, and a door that was technically rated for a security application that had been discontinued. The door had 2 deadbolts and a crossbar bracket that currently held nothing because the crossbar was leaning against the wall outside. Tifa looked at the room, then at the door, then at the frame. She went to work. She took the heaviest section of steel shelving that was stacked against the near wall, the kind of industrial shelving that usually held engine parts or equipment crates, 4 centimeters solid stock about 60 kilograms per section, and bent the first piece around the crossbar bracket so that it formed a continuous brace running from the bracket to the door frame on the opposite side. Not welded. Mechanically interlocked, the steel deformed at specific points to lock against the frame geometry in a way that would require either a very long time or several tons of sustained force to undo. Frenchie watched this for about 15 seconds and then told her, "I was going to use the crossbar. This holds more." She seated the second brace. "I can see that, but..." She did the second brace lower at the base of the door using a shorter section bent into an L shape that seated against the floor fitting and the door base simultaneously. It wasn't pretty. It was the kind of thing that would hold. They put Homelander in the room. He was more coherent than he'd been in the van, which meant he was aware enough to look at the walls and the ceiling and the door in a specific order that communicated something about how he was processing his situation. He looked at the room, the way you look at a room when you've never been in a room before. Not spatially unfamiliar, but experientially. He had never been in a room that had him at a disadvantage. He had also never been in a room with no space to build to speed. The dimensions were 12 by 8 feet. At 12 by 8, you could take 2 running steps before you hit a wall. You could not achieve meaningful altitude from a standing start in 8 feet of ceiling clearance. The room was not designed to hold something like him. Nothing had been designed to hold something like him. But the room didn't need to hold him forever. It needed to hold him for long enough. "This is temporary," Tifa told him at the door. He looked at her. "You understand that?" She waited. "We're not keeping you here. You're here until the footage is circulated enough that it can't be buried." She paused. "After that, this is above my decision." Something moved through his face, not gratitude. Closer to the expression of someone receiving information they intended to use later. "You have no idea what happens next," he replied. His voice had recovered some of its register. Not the broadcast warmth, something harder, drier the voice he actually had when he wasn't performing with it. "No." She stepped back. "Neither do you." She stepped back. Frenchie swung the door. The latch caught. Tifa set the first brace, then the second. The steel sang once briefly as it seated. From inside, nothing. For a moment. Then a single strike against the door measured deliberate testing, rather than desperate, and then silence. He was thinking. Which was in some ways more concerning than if he'd been screaming. The room where the boys gathered for the next 40 minutes was not large. Everyone had a wall or a crate, and nobody had a chair which suited the conversation. Butcher opened with, "This doesn't end anything." "I know," answered. "He gets out of that room and he will get out. And Vought has had 12 hours to build a counter. Longer if we can't control who knows where he is." He looked at Tifa. "Your friends out there. They don't know where I am," Tifa told him. "Your fans," Butcher said. The word came out like something he'd tasted and not enjoyed. "They tracked you to within 4 blocks twice already." It's only time. Then we move him before that, replied. We've done it before. We haven't done it with him. Huey said quietly, we should talk about what comes after. Not tonight, but there has to be a structure. If there's no structure, Vought just plugs the hole and rebuilds. Nobody answered that immediately, which was its own kind of answer. The footage is enough to start a Senate investigation, Starlight said. She was on the phone, her voice thin through the speaker. I've already had 3 calls. People who want to hold hearings, people who want to know how many facilities there are and who authorized them. A pause. It won't move fast. It will get blocked and delayed and lawyered. But it started. And while that moves, Butcher said, what we run a babysitting operation. We run what we always run, told him. Except now we have evidence that can't be disputed. Butcher looked at the door to the room. The door that now had 2 extra structural braces made of bent shelving steel, which was not something he'd seen before and which he was choosing not to comment on. He's going to get out, Butcher repeated. Not as a threat. As a fact he was making sure everyone had heard. Yes, a pause. Eventually. He looked at her. And that doesn't bother you. What bothers me, she said, is the 12 people who were in those facilities, and the 6 we got out, and the ones in the next city who are in the same situation right now. She held his gaze. That's what this was for, not him. Butcher looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who was deciding whether to say the thing they were thinking, and who had decided unusually not to. He turned away. At 2 in the morning, Tifa stood outside the safe house in the narrow gap between the building and the fence line where the streetlight didn't reach. The city was running its late-night frequency, fewer vehicles. Different sounds, the particular quality of urban silence that wasn't silence at all, but just a lower register of the same noise. She was looking at the sky. Not at anything specific. Not with the weight of someone collapsing inward. Not with the performance of someone reflecting for an audience. Just the habit of someone who had spent a lot of time in places that didn't have roofs, or had roofs that didn't hold, and had learned to take the open sky when it was available. Her phone, Frenchie's throwaway wiped every 6 hours, had 3 notifications she hadn't opened. She knew what they would say. Some version of what they'd been saying since the first clip, that she was a hero or a terrorist or a tool or a symbol or a threat, depending on which account you checked and what hour it was and what Vought's communications team had released in the last 15 minutes. She was none of those things. She was someone who had a plan to make and a question she hadn't answered. The question was the same one she'd set aside on the second day in front of the bodega, watching the news ticker call a church family domestic terrorists. She'd tucked it into the place where she put things that couldn't be handled yet and needed to be handled eventually. I need to find a way back. She held it for a moment, the way you hold something you've been carrying for long enough that you're not sure if it's heavy anymore or if you've just gotten used to the weight. Then Frenchie's voice came from the doorway behind her. The scanner says they've pulled back from the perimeter. Ashley's war room went dark 20 minutes ago. She's either done for the night or she moved to a channel we're not watching. Probably both, Tifa answered. Probably. A pause. There are people in the building on Claremont. Found 3 more names on the secondary list. Pickup scheduled for 6 a.m. She turned from the sky. What's the layout? 2 floors, 4 rooms, single stairwell. Ground floor entry has a dead zone and the camera at the... Send it to the phone. She went back inside. And the chyrons were already shifting not toward the truth exactly, but toward the truth-adjacent version that institutional journalism landed on when the footage was too unambiguous to simply deny. On one channel, Homelander ambushed by unregistered enhanced. On another, The same clip running on loop with no chyron at all. Just a news anchor who had stopped talking mid-sentence 30 seconds ago and hadn't started again. Somewhere in the comment architecture below both feeds, hashtag national waifu and hashtag terrorist activity were running in the same thread sometimes, in the same post, and the gap between them was smaller than it should have been. The transit worker they'd taken from the secondary location was on a third channel talking to a reporter. He was saying the word planted, and the channel was airing it, which was not the kind of thing that happened easily or quickly, and which meant the architecture Vought had built was developing cracks that their lawyers were going to spend the next several months trying to fill. In the room at the safe house, something hit the door once and then went quiet. 3 blocks away, at the edge of a different kind of darkness, Vaught's response team was establishing a perimeter around a building they'd been told the target was using as a base. The building was a parking structure. It was completely empty. Frenchie had dropped the ghost signal 40 minutes ago, routed through a relay 2 blocks from the warehouse, and it had taken Vaught's location team exactly as long to find it as he'd calculated it would. They would figure out it was a decoy in about 4 minutes. And on 60 million screens, the number had kept climbing past 19 million, past 30. To something that analysts would spend the next week contextualizing. 2 people were still visible, captured in that overhead drone angle that Gerald had not cut and Ashley had decided not to cut, and which had now been seen by more people than any single piece of footage in the previous 14 months. 1 figure on the ground, 1 figure above him. No caption needed. No anchor voiceover. No chyron. Just the geometry of it, which was enough. The clip didn't have an ending frame. It just kept going, the 2 figures. The empty warehouse, the pale strip of emergency lighting still running along the roofline, the city visible through the structural gap in the far wall. Tifa wasn't watching it. She was already 3 blocks away, looking at a floor plan on a throwaway phone, and the night had several hours left in it, and there was still work to do.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.